They told Everett Goode he didn't belong there before he even set his briefcase down. It wasn't anything dramatic. No one shouted. No one blocked the door. It was quieter than that, the kind of dismissal that happens in the space between a handshake and eye contact. In the half-second, someone decides whether you're worth the full version of their attention. Everett had learned to read that half-second the way a sailor reads the sky. He'd been reading it his whole life. The morning it started, he arrived at Caldwell and Morrow Architecture at 7:43:17 before his official start time as the firm's new senior design principal. The lobby smelled like fresh paint and expensive coffee. A young woman at the reception desk looked up, assessed him in that half-second, and said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Deliveries go around back." Everett Goode was 51 years old. He had designed 3 buildings that were currently in architectural textbooks. He had a master's degree from Columbia and a client list that included 2 governors and a hospital network that served 6 states. He was wearing a charcoal Ermenegildo Zegna suit that cost more than most people's rent. He smiled. He said, "I'm Everett Goode. I start today as senior design principal." The woman blinked. The smile stayed exactly where it was, frozen and recalibrating. "Oh," she said, "of course. Let me call someone." Everett set his briefcase down on the marble floor, folded his hands in front of him, and waited. He had gotten very good at waiting. Here's what nobody at Caldwell and Morrow knew about Everett Goode on that first morning. He almost hadn't come. He'd spent 22 years building his own firm in Atlanta, Goode Design Studio. From a 2-person operation out of a rented office above a dry cleaner on Peachtree to a 14-person team with a project backlog stretching 3 years. He hadn't needed Caldwell and Morrow. He'd been recruited. Their managing partner, a man named Charles Ashby, had flown to Atlanta twice, taken Everett to dinner at Bacchanalia, and made a case that felt, at the time, genuinely compelling. The firm was going national. They wanted someone with Everett's aesthetic sensibility and his relationships in the Southeast. They were offering him a partnership track. His wife, Josephine, had asked him twice if he was sure. "They're offering you a seat at their table," she said one evening, sitting across from him with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. "But it's still their table." Everett had kissed her on the cheek and told her he knew what he was doing. He wasn't entirely sure he did. But he'd said yes anyway, because at 51, a man who has built something once starts to wonder if he can build something different, bigger. He wanted to find out. What he found instead on his first morning at the Glass and Steel Caldwell and Morrow offices in Charlotte was that Charles Ashby was in London for 2 weeks and had neglected to tell most of the staff who Everett was or why he was there. The man who came down to receive him was named Philip Ostrander. Senior associate, 12 years with the firm, the kind of man who wore his tenure like a piece of jewelry. He had the handshake of someone who had decided before the shake how firm it was going to be. Ostrander's was soft, deliberately so. "We weren't expecting you until next Monday," Ostrander said. "My offer letter says the 14th, Everett said. "Today is the 14th. A pause. "Well, Charles isn't in, so we'll find you somewhere to sit for now." Somewhere to sit. As if Everett had wandered in off the street asking for directions. He was given a workstation in an open-plan bullpen area. No window, no nameplate. The kind of desk that said temporary in every dimension. His actual office, Ostrander explained, was still being prepared. When Everett asked how long that preparation had been underway, Ostrander said, "These things take time," and moved on before Everett could ask a follow-up. Everett sat down at the temporary desk. He opened his briefcase. He took out a yellow legal pad, uncapped a pen, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then he wrote, "Ostrander Philip, we weren't expecting you. Lobby, 8:02 a.m. He drew a line under it. He had always kept notes. His mother, a woman who cleaned houses in Birmingham for 30 years, had told him when he was 9 years old, "Write things down, baby." People forget what they said. Paper doesn't. He'd listened. The first 2 weeks were an education. Not in architecture, Everett could have taught the firm's entire staff a semester of graduate-level design theory without blinking. No, it was an education in the particular physics of a predominantly white institution, encountering a black man who was supposed to be their equal, and had decided, for reasons they couldn't quite articulate, that this was not acceptable. It came in forms both large and stupid. There was the Tuesday morning all-hands meeting where Everett arrived on time, took a seat at the main conference table, and watched the junior associate next to him physically shift his chair 2 inches to the right. Not dramatically, just enough. The chair legs made a small sound on the hardwood floor. The young man didn't look up from his laptop. Everett noted the date, the time, and the name on the badge. Connor Falk. There was the project review where Everett presented a concept for the Meridian Medical Center Commission. 12 months of work he'd brought from Atlanta. Relationships he'd cultivated personally. And a partner named Sylvia Vance spent 40 minutes asking questions that were less questions than they were slow-motion doubt. The kind of interrogation that doesn't happen when a room has already decided to trust you. When it was over, Vance turned to the room and said, "Interesting direction," in a tone that meant the opposite. Everett wrote it down. Vance, Sylvia, interesting direction. Meridian Review, 3:47 p.m. There was the Friday afternoon when Everett walked into the kitchen to find 3 associates going silent in a way that meant the silence was about him. He poured his coffee. He said, "Good afternoon." 2 of them said it back. 1 didn't. He wrote it down, not out of bitterness, not out of some plan for revenge. He wrote things down because his mother had taught him to, and because 22 years in architecture had taught him that documentation is not a weapon, it's a record. And records, eventually, have a way of mattering. What Caldwell and Morrow didn't know, couldn't know, was the thing that was happening quietly in the background of all of it. 3 weeks after Everett arrived, Marcus Webb contacted him. Marcus Webb was the real estate development director for Everett Group, a private equity firm that had recently acquired 400 acres of mixed-use development land in the Research Triangle. It was, conservatively, a $200 million project, possibly more. Webb had seen Everett's work on the Hartsfield expansion. He wanted good design studio. "I'm with Caldwell and Morrow now," Everett told him on the phone. "I know," Marcus said. "I want you, not them." Everett thought about it for 3 days. He thought about the desk with no nameplate, about Sylvia Vance's interesting direction, about Philip Ostrander and his soft, deliberate handshake. He thought about Josephine saying it's still their table. He called his old attorney in Atlanta, a woman named Dorinda Clay, and asked her to pull up his contract with Caldwell and Morrow. He spent 2 evenings going through it line by line. There was a non-compete clause. It was specific to existing clients of the firm and to the state of North Carolina. The Novaris project was in North Carolina. He called Dorinda back. They talked for an hour. When they were done, Everett sat alone in the kitchen of the apartment he was renting in Charlotte while Josephine finished out the school year in Atlanta, and he looked at the yellow legal pad on the table in front of him. 7 weeks of notes, dates, names. Specific language verbatim, because Everett Goode had a memory trained by decades of client meetings to retain exact words. He made himself a cup of tea. He sat with it until it went cold. Then he picked up the phone and called Marcus Webb back. "Give me 60 days, Everett said. The thing about Caldwell and Morrow was that they had no idea what they had done. They thought Everett Goode was a hire. A credential, perhaps, a name on a wall that signaled a certain kind of firm-wide aspiration. They had not understood, when Charles Ashby made that second trip to Atlanta and sat across from Everett at Bacchanalia, that the man being recruited was not a man who needed to be rescued. He had come willingly, yes. He had come with genuine interest, yes. But he had also come the way a surgeon comes to a new hospital, with his own instruments, his own methods, his own professional reputation intact and entirely portable. You don't sideline a surgeon and then wonder why the patients stop coming. At week 9, Everett was removed from the Meridian Medical Center project. The official language was restructuring the team for efficiency. Sylvia Vance delivered it in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. She had paperwork. The paperwork was very organized. Everett sat across from her and listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I developed the Meridian client relationship. I brought that commission to this firm." Vance said, "The commission belongs to the firm, Everett." He wrote it down that evening. Vance, Sylvia, "The commission belongs to the firm. Conference room B, 2:21 p.m. Then he called Dorinda Clay. Then he called Marcus Webb. Then he sent 3 emails to Charles Ashby, to the firm's managing director, and to the head of HR, requesting a formal meeting to discuss his role, the terms of his recruitment, and several specific incidents he wished to address. He attached, as supporting documentation, a 14-page memo he had spent the previous weekend preparing, organized chronologically, with dates, names, direct quotations, and relevant sections of his offer letter highlighted in yellow. 14 pages. 7 weeks of notes. Every name. Every chair that scraped 2 inches to the right. Every interesting direction. Every soft handshake. He sent the emails at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. By noon, Charles Ashby had cut his London trip short. The meeting happened on a Thursday, in the largest conference room on the 4th floor, the one with the long table and the view of the Charlotte skyline and the framed covers of Architectural Digest going back 30 years. There were 6 people on the Caldwell and Morrow side of the table. Everett came with Dorinda Clay, who had flown up from Atlanta the night before and was wearing a suit the color of midnight and an expression that suggested she had eaten law firms like this one for breakfast on multiple occasions. Philip Ostrander was not in the room. He had been conspicuously absent from the firm for 2 days, a coincidence that was not a coincidence. Charles Ashby opened by saying this was a conversation, not a formal proceeding. He used the word conversation 4 times in his first 3 minutes of speaking. Everett counted. Dorinda Clay let him finish. Then she opened her leather portfolio, removed a copy of Everett's 14-page memo, and placed it in the center of the table. My client was recruited to this firm, she said, with specific representations about his role, his authority, and his partnership track. What has occurred in the 9 weeks since his arrival constitutes, at minimum, a breach of his employment agreement. At maximum, and here she paused, just long enough for the pause to do its work. It constitutes a pattern of conduct that would be of significant interest to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The room got quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of people listening, the quiet of people calculating. Ashby said carefully, "We want to resolve this." "Good," Dorinda said. "Then let's talk about what resolution looks like." Everett spoke only once during the formal portion of the meeting. Ashby had been talking for several minutes about misunderstandings and transition challenges, and the general difficulty of integrating new leadership at a firm with a strong culture, and at some point, mid-sentence, Everett raised one hand slightly from the table. Ashby stopped. "I want to make something clear," Everett said. He kept his voice level. He had been keeping his voice level for 9 weeks, and it had cost him something, but he had done it. "I didn't come here because I needed this firm. I came because Charles told me I was being brought in as a partner-track principal with full client authority and a specific portfolio to develop. What I found instead was a temporary desk, a project stripped from me that I originated, and 9 weeks of being treated like I was applying for a position I had already been given." He picked up a single sheet of paper from the stack in front of him and slid it across the table. "That is a letter of intent from Novaris Group," he said, "indicating their interest in engaging me personally for the Research Triangle development. I have not signed anything. I have not violated the terms of my contract. But I want this room to understand something clearly. My value to this firm was never theoretical. It was documented. It brought a $250 opportunity to this table." Ashby looked at the letter. He looked at Dorinda. He looked at Everett. "What do you want?" Ashby said. Everett had thought about this question for a long time. He thought about the lobby desk with no nameplate. He thought about Connor Falk's chair 2 inches to the right. He thought about Josephine, who had asked him twice if he was sure, and who deserved an honest answer about what he'd learned. "I want what I was promised," Everett said. "A partnership track role with real authority and real clients. The Meridian Commission reinstated under my lead. A formal acknowledgement of what happened in writing. And I want Philip Ostrander's conduct reviewed and addressed by the firm. Not quietly reassigned. Addressed." He let it sit. "If those things happen," he said, "I stay. If they don't, Dorinda and I will be in touch with the CEOC by end of week, and I'll be signing a contract with Novaris before the month is out." The resolution came in stages. Philip Ostrander did not return to the firm. The official statement used the phrase mutually agreed departure, which told anyone who knew how to read corporate language exactly what it meant. Sylvia Vance issued a written acknowledgement. Not quite an apology, but close enough that Dorinda considered it acceptable, regarding the Meridian project and the question of whose relationships had generated it. Everett was given his actual office. Window on the southeast corner, 4th floor, a view of the skyline that on clear days stretched all the way to the hills beyond the city. His name went on the door in the same brushed steel lettering as every other principal. His nameplate went on the lobby directory in alphabetical order, right where it should have been from day one. The Meridian Medical Center project came back to him. He redesigned the primary entrance atrium, an element Vance's interim team had handled with the visual imagination of a parking structure, and the clients, who had been quietly unhappy, called Ashby personally to say they were relieved. The Novaris conversation didn't end. Marcus Webb was patient. He kept the door open. 6 months after the Thursday meeting, Everett sat down with him properly, and they talked for 4 hours about the Research Triangle project. The scale of it, the community considerations. The design philosophy Everett had been developing for years around what he called dignified density. The idea that you could build at scale without building coldly. They reached an agreement that brought Caldwell and Morrow in as a partner firm, with Everett leading the design team. It was, structurally, the thing Ashby had promised when he flew to Atlanta. Everett as the bridge, the relationship, the reason $250 million was coming through that firm's door. Ashby, to his credit, understood this. He sent Everett a note, handwritten, 2 paragraphs. He said he hadn't handled the transition well. He said he should have been present. He said he was glad Everett had stayed. Everett read it twice, put it in his desk drawer, and went back to work. Josephine came up from Atlanta in April, after her school year ended. She stood in Everett's corner office on the 4th floor and looked out at the Charlotte skyline for a long moment. "So you built another table," she said. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that lives in the chest. "Something like that." She turned and looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 23 years, clearly, without sentiment, with the particular love of someone who knows exactly who you are and has decided that person is worth standing next to. "You still have the legal pad?" she asked. He opened his desk drawer. It was there. 41 pages now. The original 7 weeks plus all the notes he'd kept afterward, everything from the Thursday meeting onward, dates, names, exact words, the full record. Josephine looked at it. She looked at him. "Your mother would have liked this ending," she said. Everett closed the drawer. Outside the window, the Charlotte skyline held the last of the afternoon light. The kind of light that turns glass buildings the color of copper, the color of something valuable that has been under pressure for a very long time. He thought about his mother, about the houses she had cleaned, the floors she had gotten down on her knees to scrub, the way she had always come home smelling like other people's soap. About the 9-year-old boy she had told to write things down, because people forget what they said and paper doesn't. He thought about the lobby desk with no nameplate, about the soft handshake, about a chair scraped 2 inches to the right on a hardwood floor in a room full of people who had decided, in half a second, what kind of man he was. They had been wrong about all of it, every single detail. The quietest man in the room had been the one building the strongest case, and when the time came, he hadn't needed to raise his voice. He'd needed only to open a drawer, place 14 pages on a table, and let the record speak for itself.